That's Hyde Police Headquarters, the center of one of the biggest ever police search operations in this country. And it's collecting evidence which might confirm the killings of young children up on the Pennine Moors about 7 or 8 miles from here.
Could this be the last search for Keith Bennett? Once again, forensic officers are combing through the earth of this infamous moor. They are looking for 12-year-old Keith, who went missing in 1964. He is the only victim of Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, who has never been found.
The series of brutal murders, which saw the two exclusively target children, earned these two the nickname the most hated couple in England.
The area where they assaulted, murdered and buried these children is known as Saddleworth Moor.
Even as a child, Ian Brady was regarded as a secretive outsider. Born in one of the roughest slums in Glasgow, he grew up with an interest in sadism, but after meeting Myra Hindley, that escalated.
Often what's motivating the killer couple is something that psychologists call a folie à deux, literally a madness shared by two.
Their killing began with 16-year-old Pauline Reed, lured into Hindley's car and taken to the moor to meet Brady. Pauline was murdered and buried there.
She's not suffering now. Nobody can hurt her now. Feel her that close now, you see, so that seems to put me up a lot. I feel her so close to me. I miss her very much, I still do.
Next came 12-year-old John Kilbride, a clever young man, good at football. John Kilbride had been lured into Myra Hindley's van and driven to the moor. His body would not be found for another 2 years. He'd been sexually assaulted and strangled.
It wasn't a good time, that 2 years. It was a big relief when he was found.
10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey's voice was recorded by Brady as she begged in vain for her life. When he and Hindley finally came to court, such details provoked an outrage.
I have always been implacably opposed to capital punishment, but I would have made an exception in the cases of these two.
Saddleworth Moor has been the focus of searches for Keith over the last nearly 6 decades. Brady was even brought onto the moors to show officers the graves of his victims. The bodies of 3 of them were discovered, but neither Brady or Hindley would say where Keith Bennett was buried before they died. His mother, Winnie, fought tirelessly to find her son.
I will never give up, never in a month Sunday. If it takes me to my grave, I'll carry on till then.
Before she passed away 10 years ago, never knowing where her child was hidden.
Hindley, who said that she had a sore throat, gave her evidence in a low, husky voice. She said that she had loved Brady and still loved him.
After 5 decades, the question as to where he buried the body of 12-year-old Keith Bennett remains. If his poor health is now as bad as he suggests, will Brady go to his grave without revealing that last sad secret?
The Pennine Moorlands, scene of one of the most intensive murder hunts of the century. Police and hundreds of volunteers continue their gruesome search for the bodies of murder victims, working on a scant tip-off that the bleak moors hide the evidence of a mass murderer. A mobile police headquarters directs operations. Police and tracker dogs have stepped up the search since the body of 10-year-old Ann Downey was found here. She had been missing since last Boxing Day. Nearby, the hunt also revealed the grave of 12-year-old John Kilbride. Our cameraman was on the spot when more clues were discovered. Tests may prove them to be of vital importance. While the moorland search continues, police have been probing the mysteries of bloodstains in an unoccupied house near Manchester. An old van discovered in Nottinghamshire may also prove to be a vital clue in the murder hunt.
On today's episode, we are going to be examining one of the most notorious murder sprees in British history, the Moors murders perpetrated by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. This is one of the most disturbing, one of the darkest stories that we've ever covered here on this channel, and our visit to the moors at the end of the video revealed some dark hidden truths about this entire affair. For decades now, the murders have been so notorious in Britain that everybody knows the story. Everybody knows the number of victims. there seems to be some sort of a conclusion. But in this video, we're going to talk about additional victims that could possibly have been attributed to the two killers. We're going to talk about bodies that were never discovered and discuss some of the more mysterious elements of this crime spree that is oftentimes glossed over or unreported upon by major news media. But without further ado, I want to warn you guys, this is a very sad, dark, and twisted story, and the footage we captured is horrifying, so viewer and listener discretion is advised. First, we have to talk about the story. Between 1963 and 1965, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley orchestrated a series of murders in the Manchester, England area that became known infamously as the Moors murders. Their victims, Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans, were aged between 10 and 17 years old, with at least 4 of the victims suffering sexual assaults before they were murdered. The chosen burial ground for the killers was a remote, foggy moor in the middle of nowhere near Manchester, named Saddleworth Moor, a desolate place where the dead go to die. While 2 victims' bodies were uncovered in the moor in 1965, the third body wasn't discovered until about 2 decades later in the year 1987. And despite numerous searches, young Keith Bennett's remains remain missing and are presumed to be buried somewhere out on that desolate moor. That's right, to this day, at least one victim's body has never been found that is attributed to Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, the killer couple. No one knows where his final resting place is, but today we're going to discuss some theories. Initially convicted for the murders of Kilbride, Downey, and Evans, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were eventually sentenced to life imprisonment. The case reopened in 1985 when Ian Brady confessed to killing Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett, prompting Myra Hindley to end her claims of innocence in 1987 and admit that she took part in all 5 of the brutal murders. Both killers were later escorted to Saddleworth Moor to assist in locating additional graves, but sadly, like I said, Keith Bennett's body has never been found. Myra Hindley, labeled the most evil woman in Britain by the press, repeatedly argued for her release, claiming she was rehabilitated, she had changed, she deserved to be out in the general public. Her pleas, though, were denied, and she died in 2002 at age 60 after 36 years behind bars. Ian Brady, formerly declared a psychopath in 1985, spent the rest of his life in Ashworth Hospital, a mental facility where he expressed a strong desire to die. He passed away in 2017 at the age of 79, having been incarcerated for 51 years. Experts like forensic psychiatrist Malcolm McCulloch have described the crimes as the result of an unfortunate chain of events, while the trial judge condemned the pair as 2 sadistic killers of the utmost depravity. Their crimes drew widespread global attention and remain a notorious chapter in British criminal history. So first, let's talk about the killers themselves. Ian Brady, originally named Ian Duncan Stewart, was born on January 2nd, 1938, in the Gorbals region of Glasgow to Margaret Peggy Stewart, an unmarried waitress. Ian's father was never identified, though his mother claimed he was a newspaper reporter who died shortly before Ian's birth. Unable to support her son, Peggy entrusted Ian's care to Mary and John Sloan, a local couple with 4 children. Although he was raised as Ian Sloan, Peggy, Ian's mother, remained inside of his life, visiting him regularly, paying him visits, and still showing affection and love for her child. As a kid, Ian Brady showed an early interest in the outdoors, particularly after a visit to Loch Lomond at age 9. Soon after, his family moved to a council estate in Pollock. Allegations of animal cruelty emerged during his childhood, with reports eventually suggesting that Ian tortured and killed animals, though Ian denied these claims. His disturbing behaviors worsened throughout his teenage years at the Shawlands Academy, where he was known for delinquency, and he constantly committed crimes, including breaking into houses, which led to appearances in juvenile court. At age 15, Ian Brady left school and held a few brief jobs, including a stint as a shipyard tea-boy and a butcher's messenger. A relationship with a girl ended when Ian Brady threatened her with a knife, an incident that led to further legal trouble. Facing 9 charges, Ian was placed on probation on the condition that he live with his mother, who had relocated to Manchester. By then, Peggy had married Patrick Brady, and Ian adopted his stepfather's surname. Patrick helped him secure a job at Smithfield Market, but Ian's theft from the market led to a 3-month stint in Strangeways prison. And you can see here early on there's a pattern in Ian Brady's life. He has contempt for the law, he loves breaking the law, and he listens to nobody. No authority was able to hold him down. Ian's 2 subsequent years in Borstal training were marked by disciplinary issues, including being transferred to a tougher facility in Hull after being caught drinking underage. Upon his release in 1957, Ian struggled to maintain steady work, eventually teaching himself bookkeeping to improve his prospects. In 1959, he secured a clerical position at Millward's Merchandising, a chemical distribution company in Gorton. Colleagues described him as quiet and punctual, but prone to irritability. In his personal life, Ian displayed a fascination with Nazi ideology, reading Mein Kampf and literature on wartime atrocities. He seemed to be especially interested in the and the genocides and torture and war crimes committed by these regimes. He also rode a motorcycle, often exploring the Pennines in his free time. That's the area where Saddleworth Moor is. So as you can see, Ian Brady was a troubled kid who came from a somewhat, supportive, loving, normal home. But when he was younger, he was torturing animals, he was breaking the law, he wasn't listening to anybody, and he was exhibiting these red flags. But before we move on, we have to talk about the other half of the killer couple, the most hated woman in Britain, Myra Hindley. Myra Hindley was born on July 23, 1942 in Crumpstall, Manchester, to Nellie and Bob Hindley. She grew up in Gorton, a working-class neighborhood known for its poor living conditions. Her father, a violent alcoholic and former soldier who had served in North Africa, Cyprus, and Italy during World War II, was known for his tough, no-bullshit demeanor. Myra's home life was challenging, sharing a cramped space with her parents until her younger sister Maureen's birth in 1946 made the situation worse. At age 5, Myra Hindley moved in with her grandmother nearby. Myra Hindley's father expected her to be tough and taught her how to fight. This mindset of fight or die was ingrained early in Myra's mind. At just 8 years old, she retaliated against a boy who scratched her face, knocking him down under her father's encouragement. This incident, which she later referred to as her first victory, reflected the violent environment both at home and outside that Myra Hindley was raised in. Forensic psychiatrist Malcolm McCulloch suggested that this upbringing shaped Myra Hindley's perception of violence and its role in relationships. She grew up loving violence. It was a part of her life, and it would continue to be a part of her life up until the day she was eventually arrested for some of the most heinous crimes in British history. A significant emotional event in Myra's life occurred in 1957 when her friend Michael Higgins drowned in a local reservoir. Myra, who declined Michael's invitation to go out swimming that day, was devastated and blamed herself. She thought if only she was there swimming with him, she would have been able to save his life. Feeling horrible, she organized a collection for a funeral wreath, and the experience deepened her connection to the Roman Catholic Church, where she had been baptized as an infant. Following Michael's funeral, Myra pursued religious instruction and received her first official communion in 1958, taking the confirmation name Veronica. Myra then began working as a junior clerk at an electrical engineering firm, where she was well liked, even receiving support from colleagues when she lost her first paycheck. At 17, she briefly became engaged but ended the relationship, feeling her fiancé lacked maturity and ambition. She also took judo lessons, although her reluctance to release holds made her an unpopular partner. Myra later worked at an engineering company in Gorton, but was dismissed after 6 months for absenteeism. These formative experiences, marked by hardship, violence, and personal loss, set the stage for Myra's later infamy and prudish nature. Hey, look at that. Look at that. Just got a plaque for 100,000 on Conspiracy Files. That's awesome. At 18, Myra Hindley began working as a typist at Millward's in January of 1961, where she quickly became infatuated with someone she met on the job, Ian Brady. Myra kept a diary detailing her fascination with Ian, despite dating other men at the time. Their first conversation took place in late July of 1961, but it wasn't until December 22nd that Ian Brady asked her out on a date. And that's really weird. That's my birthday, actually, December 22nd. And according to most reports, their romance flourished almost immediately. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley's outings and dates typically included watching films, often X-rated films, followed by evenings at Myra's house drinking German wine. And immediately, Ian Brady's influence on Myra grew steadily. He introduced her to books on atrocities, and they often spent lunch breaks reading and discussing them. Myra began to adopt a striking new look, bleaching her hair blonde and wearing bold red lipstick to emulate an ideal of Aryan beauty. Now, even though Ian Brady still was abusing Myra in his own way and already manipulating her and had done a lot of weird things to her, including, like Myra told her friend, drugging her. Yeah, that's right. When she was dating Ian initially, Myra told one of her friends that she had been drugged by Ian, but she shrugged it off. She still remained deeply infatuated. Myra later described Ian's influence as overwhelming, admitting in a parole plea that she would have believed anything he told her. Myra's transformation extended to her wardrobe as well, as she suddenly started dressing in risque outfits, such as leather jackets, high boots, and extremely short skirts. The couple grew more withdrawn from their colleagues, friends, and family, and instead frequented libraries to borrow books on philosophy, crime, and torture, including works by Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, and the Marquis de Sade. Myra, though unlicensed at first, often rented vans for the pair to drive around town. Vans as in like a truck. And initially, Ian and Myra began dreaming about robbing a bank. They concocted a plan. They were gonna steal a ton of money. They didn't care if someone died. They started fantasizing about this bank robbery. And at around the same time, Myra Hindley also developed a sudden interest in firearms. She joined a rifle club and purchased several guns, including a .22 caliber rifle, a Webley .45, and a Smith & Wesson .38. Although her shooting skills were poor and her temper was off-putting to other club members, Myra continued to pursue the hobby persistently. Meanwhile, Ian and Myra shifted their focus to photography. At one point, Ian went out and upgraded his basic camera equipment, buying top dollar stuff, like a very nice camera, lighting rigs, and everything you need to conduct a photo shoot. And the pair began to take very explicit photographs of each other, reflecting Myra's evolution from a reserved, polite young woman to someone shaped by Ian Brady's dominance and their shared dark interests. In July 1963, Myra Hindley claimed that Ian Brady began discussing his obsession with committing the perfect murder, often referencing the novel Compulsion, which fictionalized the infamous Leopold and Loeb case. The story involved two men who attempted to carry out the perfect murder of a young boy and planned on escaping the death penalty due to their age. Now, as we all know, that's an actual true crime story, Leopold and Loeb, and they didn't commit the perfect crime. These two were elitists and intellectuals who thought that they were smarter than everybody else. They thought everyone was just stupid and they'd be able to murder a young boy and just get away with it. But that didn't happen. The law caught up with them and they were sentenced to life in prison. It's interesting that Ian Brady and Myra, Ian was discussing this and they wanted to also commit a similar perfect crime. By June of 1963, Ian had moved into Myra's grandmother's house in Gorton, and this is when they started looking for their first victim. You have to imagine at this time, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were drinking a lot. They were consuming a bunch of substances. They were staying out late at night. They were engaging in all of this risque, graphic, explicit activity together. They were pushing their limits, reading books on torture and sadism, and Ian had this hold on Myra Hindley. It was like a mental hypnosis where she would literally do anything that he said, like if he told her, go pick up that rock, 500 feet away from here and bring it over, she would have done it. That's how strong his control was over her. And it was in the year 1963 when, unfortunately, the pair found their first victim. The couple's first victim, 16-year-old Pauline Reed, was killed on July 12, 1963. Pauline, a former classmate of Myra Hindley's younger sister Maureen, and briefly linked to David Smith, a local teenager, disappeared after last being seen on her way to a dance. Now, despite extensive questioning, the police found no immediate leads and cleared David Smith of involvement. So Pauline Reed was just walking along. She was headed towards a dance that evening where she was going to meet up with some friends, and she seemingly vanished into thin air. But we do know what happened to her, and we're going to discuss that in a moment. A few months later, on November 23rd, 1963, the couple found another victim. On that day, it was unfortunately 12-year-old John Kilbride, whom they lured from a market in Ashton-under-Lyne. The couple then murdered John and buried his body on Saddleworth Moor. The disappearance prompted a large-scale search involving 2,000 volunteers and hundreds of statements, but the boy remained missing. Weeks later, Myra Hindley rented a vehicle, likely to go revisit the burial site to ensure that it hadn't been disturbed, to make sure that their tracks were covered. She later purchased a car explicitly for similar purposes. The couple's third victim, 12-year-old Keith Bennett, vanished from Manchester's Longsight district on June 16, 1964. His disappearance led to suspicions surrounding his stepfather, Jimmy Johnson, who endured repeated questioning and a thorough search of his home. The police even extended their investigation to neighboring houses, but found nothing. There was no trace of Keith Bennett anywhere. Meanwhile, Myra's younger sister, Maureen, married David Smith, the guy who was questioned in Pauline Reed's disappearance, on August 15, 1964, in a modest register office ceremony. The event was arranged hastily, with no family present, as Maureen was 7 months pregnant at the time with David's child. Myra Hindley disapproved of her sister's new marriage, while her mother felt embarrassed by the circumstances of the shotgun wedding. But despite this, the couple moved into David Smith's father's home, and the next day, Ian Brady invited the group on a trip to Windermere. This outing marked the beginning of Ian Brady's friendship with David Smith, who was drawn to Ian Brady's charisma and intellectual discussions on societal issues. Ian, in turn, admired David's demeanor, and the two began bonding over their shared fantasies, much to Myra Hindley's apparent jealousy. In 1964, Myra Hindley, Ian Brady, and Myra Hindley's grandmother were relocated to 16 Wardlebrook Avenue in Hattersley as part of Manchester's post-war slum clearance program. On their new estate, they befriended Patricia Hodges, an 11-year-old neighbor. Patricia often accompanied the couple, Ian and Myra, on trips to Saddleworth Moor, where many locals collected peat for their gardens. But despite their heinous activities, the fact that they had already murdered multiple children, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, according to all accounts, never harmed 11-year-old Patricia Hodges, likely due to the proximity of her home to theirs, which could have made her disappearance too risky. On Boxing Day 1964, Myra Hindley dropped her grandmother off at a relative's house and refused to let her return that night. Meanwhile, on that very evening, 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey vanished from a fun fair in Ancoats. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Leslie Ann Downey was found. Her stepfather, Alan West, immediately came under suspicion, but was ultimately cleared. The next day after the abduction, Myra allowed her grandmother to return home, giving her the explanation that she just wanted some time home alone that evening. By early 1965, Patricia Hodges, that 11-year-old girl, had stopped visiting Ian and Myra, but David Smith remained a frequent guest. Ian gave David Smith books and engaged him in discussions about bank robbery and murder. In July 1965, Myra Hindley's 23rd birthday coincided with her sister Maureen and brother-in-law David Smith moving into a nearby apartment. The two couples began spending more time together, although Ian Brady largely dictated their interactions and was still controlling everything in everybody's lives. In later years, Myra claimed her involvement in the murders was driven by fear and manipulation. She alleged that Ian Brady had drugged her, blackmailed her with explicit photos, and threatened her sister Maureen's life. In 2008, her attorney shared Myra Hindley's confession, in which she admitted, quote, "I ought to have been hanged. I deserved it. My crime was worse than Brady's because I enticed the children. I have always regarded myself as worse than Brady." These admissions reflected Myra Hindley's acknowledgement of her central role in luring those victims, the children, to their eventual and deaths. But now we have to go back because we skipped over the stories of the murders themselves, and there's a lot of detail here that's really important for you to understand just how depraved these killers were, just what they did to these children. It's still, to this day, it's really hard to even wrap your head around this stuff, even though this happened, over 60 years ago. It's still unbelievable that people were this monstrous. So we first have to talk about what really happened to Pauline Reed. On July 12, 1963, Ian Brady announced his intent to carry out what he called the perfect murder. He instructed Myra to drive that borrowed van while he followed her on his motorcycle, planning to signal to her in the car when he identified a potential victim. Initially, Ian selected a young-looking girl on Gorton Lane, but Myra ignored his signal, recognizing her as a neighbor's child. Later on that evening, on Froxmoor Street, Ian signaled Myra again, this time for 16-year-old Pauline Reed, who was on her way to that dance. Myra then pulled over, offered Pauline a ride, and persuaded her to join them under the pretense of searching for a lost glove on Saddleworth Moor. Now this is disturbing. Myra actually knew Pauline, and I think Pauline recognized Myra. She felt like she was somebody that she could trust. So when Myra pulled over and said, "Hey, I can give you a ride. Are you going somewhere?" I know you, our families know each other. I lost a glove out on the moor. Would you come out and just help me look for it really quickly? No one back then, especially back then, would imagine that this woman who you know, who's a young woman, a kind-looking woman, someone who's friends with your family, no one would have imagined that she was going to be bringing you out there to that desolate area so that you could be raped and murdered. I mean, it's just hard to believe. Eventually, Myra Hindley and Pauline Reed arrived at the moor, Saddleworth Moor, that desolate, very dark, cold, windy area far away from civilization. And shortly after they arrived, Ian Brady arrived on his motorcycle, and Myra introduced him to Pauline as a part of the search effort for the glove. Accounts of what happened next differ. Myra claimed that she stayed in the van while Ian Brady led Pauline away into the moor. But Ian Brady later alleged that Myra's involvement was much more direct. Now, according to Myra's story, Ian grabbed Pauline and brought her out onto the moor, out of Myra's line of vision, over a hill into the darkness with no lights or anything, and he returned to the van about 30 minutes later. Once he got back to the van, Ian knocked on the window, got Myra to get out of the car, and he brought her over to the scene. When Myra arrived, she saw Pauline Reed laying critically injured in the brush, her throat savagely slashed, covered in blood, with a forceful incision that almost decapitated her. Her clothing had been ripped and disturbed, and Ian Brady admitted to Pauline before killing her. And this was very casual. Myra didn't exactly know how far Ian was going to take this, if you're believing her story. So when she came over and saw the actual crime scene and was realizing that, Ian had and murdered this teenager, it must have been shocking. According to Myra, she stayed by Pauline's side as she lay dying, as Ian Brady went off and grabbed a spade that he had hidden nearby. After the girl died, Ian then buried her while Myra returned to the van. Now that's Myra's story. So this is a game of who are you going to believe? Because according to Ian Brady, Myra Hindley wasn't innocent. He actually testified and told the authorities that Myra Hindley herself was actively involved in the assault. He told the cops that Myra Hindley herself took part in raping Pauline and the killing of the child. But eventually, at the end of the night, the couple drove away in that rented van, leaving Pauline's gruesomely brutalized body buried out somewhere in a remote portion of Saddleworth Moor. And this was only the first of their series of disturbing crimes. On the evening of November 23rd, 1963, John Kilbride, that 12-year-old boy, was approached by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley while he was at a market in Ashton-under-Lyne. At the time, the pair offered John a ride home, sweetening their offer with the promise of a bottle of sherry or alcohol. Now, obviously, this was an offer that a 12-year-old boy would find hard to refuse. But once John Kilbride entered the Ford Anglia that Myra Hindley had rented, Ian claimed that they quickly needed to stop at their house to pick up the sherry, the bottle of alcohol. He then suggested another detour, and Ian asked young John if he'd help them look for a lost glove that they had left somewhere on Saddleworth Moor that day. Now, upon reaching the moor, Ian Brady led John Kilbride away once again, while Myra Hindley remained in the car. Out of sight, Ian Brady subjected John Kilbride to a horrific assault, attempting to slit his throat with a serrated blade before ultimately strangling him with a shoelace or string. It was a gruesome scene. Ian had failed to fully slash the boy's throat, and he decided to then, while he was bleeding and screaming and crying, strangle him with that shoelace or string. After the murder, just like with Pauline, Ian Brady then buried John Kilbride in a shallow grave out on Saddleworth Moor. Later on, disturbingly, he and Myra Hindley returned to the area where John Kilbride's body was buried while all of Manchester was looking for him, and Ian took a photograph of Myra Hindley with her pet dog standing directly over the freshly disturbed burial site, a chilling keepsake of their crime. That's right, they returned to where they killed him, and they posed on top of his grave, the grave of a child, and took a photograph to remember these good memories. And now to Keith Bennett. On the evening of June 16, 1964, Myra Hindley intercepted 12-year-old Keith Bennett as he walked to his grandmother's house in Longsight. Once again, Myra acted like a kind young woman asking for a young boy's help. She at the time pulled over and asked Keith if he could help her load boxes into her mini pickup, and afterwards she said she promised to give him a ride home. However, unbeknownst to Keith, Ian Brady was hidden in the back of the vehicle, out of the boy's sight. Afterwards, Myra Hindley once again drove out to Saddleworth Moor to a remote lay-on, where suddenly Ian Brady emerged from his hiding spot, threatened Keith, and led him away out onto that desolate moor, once again claiming that the couple were searching for a lost glove. About 30 minutes later, like clockwork, Ian Brady reappeared alone, carrying a spade that he had previously stashed in the area. Now, Myra knew what was going on, but she still couldn't really believe it. She couldn't wrap her head around it, at least according to her. And when Ian eventually arrived back to the vehicle, she asked him, "What happened out there? What did you just do?" And according to her, Ian Brady then admitted that he had and strangled the boy with a piece of string, then buried him in a shallow grave on Saddleworth Moor. This cruel act added yet another horrifying chapter to the couple's series of horrifying murders. On December 26, 1964, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley visited a fun fair in Ancoats, basically like a carnival, where they spotted 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, who appeared to be there alone. Once again, using a calculated ruse or a tactic to lure these children in, Ian and Myra pretended to tumble and drop some of the items that they had been carrying right in front of Leslie, and afterwards they asked her if they could help carry the items to their car. They said they'd be really appreciative, they'd be so thankful if Leslie could help them bring these items back to their vehicle. I'm sure they offered her something in return. And afterwards, once the two at the vehicle had gained Leslie's trust, Ian and Myra convinced her to accompany them back to their house on Wardlebrook Avenue. What happened next is the most disturbing portion of this story in my mind, and something that haunts people who study this and read about this case, and I'm sure it still to this day haunts investigators that worked this whole thing. Once they arrived back at the house, Leslie, keep in mind she's 10 years old, was forcibly stripped naked, gagged, and posed around the apartment for degrading photographs. Yes, you heard that correctly. They used Leslie to produce child pornography. She was then subjected to a horrific and was ultimately killed, likely strangled with a piece of string. The most disturbing facet of all of this is that the crime itself, the extended torture and murder of 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, was recorded on an audio tape. Yes, Ian Brady wanted to record this sickening act so that he could revisit it and go back to this amazing moment in his life. And the tape captured some absolutely heartbreakingly disturbing things. On the audio tape, you can hear both Ian Brady and Myra Hindley's voices as they continued to mock and torment their victim, calling her ugly, a slut, disgusting, all sorts of horrible, demeaning terms. And you can even hear the young girl, Leslie Ann Downey, begging them for mercy, begging them, crying to stop, and even at times crying for her mother. Just crying for her mom to come save her. Myra later claimed that she had stepped away from the assault after the was finished to prepare a bath for Leslie, only to come back in and find her dead upon returning. Ian, however, once again alleged that Myra Hindley was directly responsible for the murder. According to Ian, he claimed that Myra enjoyed this whole thing. It was really her idea to murder her. She picked out how she was going to be killed, and she really enjoyed the and torture of this child. The next morning, the pair loaded up Leslie's lifeless 10-year-old body and drove her once again out to the Saddleworth Moor, where they buried her in a remote, shallow grave. She was left naked, with her clothes placed at her feet in the grave, leaving behind yet another haunting reminder of the couple's merciless crimes. On the evening of October 6, 1965, Myra Hindley drove Ian Brady to Manchester Central Railway Station, where they waited in the car as he searched for a victim. Ian soon returned with Edward Evans, a 17-year-old apprentice engineer from Ardwick, and introduced Myra to him as his sister. Ian later claimed he had approached Evans with the intent of a sexual encounter. The trio then drove back to the house on Wardlebrook Avenue, where they shared a bottle of wine together. At some point during the evening, Ian Brady instructed Myra to fetch her brother-in-law, David Smith. Now, although Myra had reservations about Ian's growing influence over Smith, her sister's husband, she complied. She went and got her sister's husband and invited him over. You know, she didn't directly say like, hey, I want you to come over and take part in this murder, but that's what she knew was going to happen. You see, David Smith admired Ian Brady. He looked up to him. The two had had hundreds of conversations about murders and graphic things like torture and even robbing banks, and they had talked about planning things like this and planning a bank robbery together and doing all of this stuff. But this level of trust was something that scared Myra Hindley. She thought that this jeopardized the pair's secrecy and felt like if David Smith was brought in on this whole thing, then she and Ian could be easily outed as the murderers that they were. But following Ian's orders, Myra brought David Smith to the house and instructed him to wait outside for a signal. When the flashing light came, which was the signal, David Smith entered and was greeted by Ian Brady, who casually mentioned retrieving miniature wine bottles before leaving him in the kitchen. Moments later, David Smith heard a piercing, high-pitched scream that he described as like a woman's. The cries continued, each one louder than the rest, until he heard Myra shout, "Dave, help him!" Rushing into the living room, David Smith was confronted by a horrifying scene. Edward Evans was lying on the couch, his head and shoulders propped up, with his legs sprawled out on the floor. Ian Brady stood over him, straddling his legs, gripping a hatchet above his head. David Smith would later say, quote, "I just stood inside the living room and I saw a young lad. He was lying with his head and shoulders on the couch and his legs were on the floor. He was facing upwards. Ian was standing over him, facing him, with his legs on either side of the young lad's legs. The lad was still screaming. Ian had a hatchet in his hand. He was holding it above his head, and he hit the lad on the left side of his head with the hatchet. I heard the blow. It was a terrible, hard blow. It sounded horrible." As the attack continued, David Smith watched in shock as Ian Brady strangled Evans with an electrical cord. During the struggle, Ian Brady injured his ankle, and the weight of Evans' body made it difficult for David Smith to move it alone. The three then wrapped the dead corpse in plastic sheeting and placed it in the spare bedroom, intending to dispose of it later. The chilling brutality of that night would soon unravel Myra and Ian's murderous partnership and put an end to the Moors murders. Now keep in mind, David Smith, he's talked about all this stuff with Ian Brady. He's gone really deep in these discussions about torture and murder, and they're graphic, and they've even planned some crimes according to some people. But he never would have expected to walk into his sister-in-law's apartment and all of a sudden be in the middle of a murder, watching his sister-in-law's boyfriend murdering a man right in front of him, asking if he would help him, do it and get rid of the body. So obviously he returned home that evening, shocked. And after Edward Evans' murder, David Smith reluctantly agreed to return to Ian Brady's house the next morning with his deceased daughter's pram to help transport the body to the car for disposal out on Saddleworth Moor. However, upon arriving home at around 3 a.m. that night, the weight of what he had witnessed overwhelmed him. David asked his wife for a cup of tea, which he then drank before becoming physically ill and confessing the night's horrors to her. By 6:10 a.m., David Smith, shaken but resolute, decided to act. Armed with a screwdriver and a bread knife for protection in case Ian Brady tried to confront him, he called the police from a phone box near the estate. Officers picked him up and brought him to the Hyde police station, where he provided a detailed account of the grisly events he had witnessed the night before. Police Superintendent Bob Talbot, accompanied by a detective sergeant, then went to Wardlebrook Avenue to investigate Ian and Myra's home. Disguised in a bread delivery man's overall over his uniform, Police Superintendent Talbot approached the back door and asked Myra if her husband was home. Myra, calm and composed, denied having a husband or any man in the house. Police Superintendent Talbot then revealed his identity as a police officer, which prompted Myra Hindley to lead him inside. In the living room, Ian Brady was lying on a divan, writing a letter to his employer to explain his injured ankle. Talbot informed Hindley and Brady that he was investigating an act of violence involving guns reported to have occurred the previous night. Myra denied any knowledge of a murder, but allowed the officers to search the house. When they inquired about the locked spare bedroom, Myra claimed that the key was at her workplace. Ian, however, interrupted her and instructed her to hand the key over. The discovery of Edward Evans' body in the spare bedroom brought the charade to an abrupt end. Ian Brady was immediately arrested on suspicion of murder. As he got dressed, he attempted to downplay the crime, stating, "Eddie and I had a row and the situation got out of hand." With the gruesome evidence now uncovered, the first cracks in Ian and Myra's reign of terror had begun to show. Though Myra was not immediately arrested after Edward's murder, she insisted on accompanying Ian to the police station, bringing her dog along. Myra refused to elaborate on the incident, claiming only that Edward's death had been an accident. She was then permitted to return home, but was instructed to report back to the police station the following day. Over the next few days, Myra visited her workplace, asking to be dismissed to qualify for unemployment benefits. During one of these visits, she found and destroyed an envelope belonging to Ian Brady, later claiming she hadn't opened it, but believed it contained plans for bank robberies. As the investigation deepened, police uncovered mounting evidence implicating Myra Hindley in the murder and potentially in other crimes. On October 11th, Myra Hindley was arrested and charged as an accessory to Edward's murder. She was remanded to Risley Prison, where the investigation continued. A search of the home on Wardlebrook Avenue revealed an exercise book bearing the name John Kilbride, prompting suspicions that Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were connected to other unsolved disappearances of children in the area. Now, Ian admitted to having a fight with Edward Evans, but claimed that the murder had been committed by himself and David Smith, insisting that Myra Hindley had only followed his orders. David Smith, however, revealed that Brady had instructed him to retrieve incriminating items, which were packed into suitcases. Although David Smith was unsure of what was in the suitcases, he mentioned Ian's habit of using railway station storage. Now, acting on this lead, the police discovered 2 suitcases at Manchester Central Railway Station on October 15th. A claim ticket for one was later found in Myra Hindley's prayer book. The contents of these suitcases included costumes, notes, disturbing graphic photographs, and negatives. But the most disturbing discoveries were explicit photographs of 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey posed in demeaning, degrading, horrific positions nude, and a 16-minute-long audio recording of her pleas for mercy as she was tortured, raped, and murdered. Sadly, Leslie Ann Downey's mother was asked to look at some of those child photographs and confirm that that was her daughter, and she was also forced to listen to that audio recording so that she could also confirm that that was her daughter's voice, and she did. Investigators also learned from Patricia Hodges, their 11-year-old neighbor, that Myra and Ian frequently visited Saddleworth Moor. Patricia directed them to key locations along the A635 road, and after that, the search was on. On October 16th, officers searching the moor discovered a child's arm bone protruding from the peat. Initially believed to belong to John Kilbride, the remains were soon identified as Leslie Ann Downey's. Her body was visually recognizable, and her mother identified her clothing, which had been buried alongside her. Among the other photographs from the suitcases were several images of the moors. Ian had boasted of having photographic proof of his crimes, and officers appealed to locals to help identify the locations depicted. So they were looking through all these photographs that Ian and Myra were taking out on the moors. This was something that they did all the time. There were tons of these photographs. How creepy is that? Of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley in the middle of their crime spree while they're burying children's bodies that they rape and kill out on the moors. They're out there in that exact area taking pictures of them smiling, posing on the graves of their victims, acting happy, like this is like a little vacation for them or a date night. And they're out there in their murder grounds where they rape and torture children, smiling and taking photographs. I mean, it's disturbing. But those photographs were key. They helped the police actually discover the final resting places of some of these children where they had been buried in these shallow, unmarked graves. It was because of these photos that they actually were able to figure out where the bodies were. On October 21st, police uncovered John Kilbride's badly decomposed body, which his mother identified because of the clothing he was wearing. That same day, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, already being held for Edward Evans' murder, were charged with Leslie Ann Downey's murder as well. Both appeared separately in court and were remanded in custody. By December 2nd, Ian faced charges for the murders of Edward Evans, John Kilbride, and Leslie Ann Downey, while Myra Hindley was charged with the murders of Downey and Evans and as an accessory to John Kilbride's murder.
My solicitor told me they'd found the body of a child, identified as Leslie Ann Downey. Did I know anything about it? And I said no. I think a week after that, I'm not sure, they found John Kilbride's body, and they charged me with the murder of, I think it was the murder of John Kilbride. Yes, it was. They sat me down behind a table, and on the table was a large poster of John Kilbride. And they had this album of photographs, and they said to me, will you just identify these pictures or photos or tell us if you've seen them before? And I looked, and it was a moorland scene, and I couldn't say I hadn't because I was standing on rock, and I said yes. And then they turned over the page, and it was horrendous. It was a picture, a photograph, just after they'd unearthed the body of John Kilbride. And I turned my head away and I said, I'm not looking at those. Please close that book.
Their committal hearings spanned 11 days, and both were sent to trial at Chester Assizes. Throughout the investigation, police discovered numerous photographs, like I just said, taken by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley out on the moors, many featuring Myra Hindley's dog, Puppet. To establish the timeline of the photos, a veterinary surgeon examined the dog in the photographs to determine its age. Tragically though, through this procedure, the dog died. Puppet didn't survive that veterinary procedure, leading to one of the few instances where Myra Hindley displayed genuine emotion. She accused the police of murdering her dog and later wrote to her mother, quote, "I feel as though my heart's been torn to pieces. I don't think anything could hurt me more than this has. The only conclusion is that some moron might have had a hold of Puppet and hurt him." Hindley's grief over the dog contrasted starkly with her otherwise cold demeanor throughout the investigation, leaving detectives with a rare glimpse of vulnerability. It seemed that the deaths of all these children that the couple had and murdered and buried in shallow graves didn't upset Myra at all, but the death of her dog deeply troubled her. The trial of Ian and Myra began on April 19, 1966 at Chester Assizes, presided over by Mr. Justice Fenton Atkinson. Due to the public outrage over their crimes, extraordinary security measures were implemented. The dock in the courthouse was fitted with bulletproof glass to protect the defendants from potential vigilante attacks. Additional precautions included a 2,500-pound public address system and 500 pounds worth of telephone equipment. The trial drew significant attention from both national and international journalists, who filled the city's hotels. Crowds of onlookers gathered outside the courthouse daily, with some traveling long distances to catch a glimpse of the proceedings.
This trial is certain to make legal history, if only because the Attorney General himself is here leading for the prosecution. It's taking place in Chester Castle. Fantastic security precautions have been taken and the precincts of the court have been very widely defined. Before you can get into the court, you have to produce no less than 3 passes if you're a mere journalist. When you do get in, you find yourself in a long, very high room, about 25 feet high, wood panelled for about 12 feet, and then light stone arches. Above that, a wooden roof with a stained glass light in it.
Ian and Myra were charged with the murders of Edward Evans, Leslie Ann Downey, and John Kilbride. David Smith and his wife, Myra Hindley's sister, they're a couple that just can't catch a break through the story, and it's really sad. And at this point, things start to get really bad for the couple. You see, David Smith, who was the key prosecution witness, he faced scrutiny over financial arrangements he had made with the News of the World, a magazine at the time. This newspaper had offered him £1,000 for his story, while People magazine in the US made a competing offer of £6,000. David Smith ultimately accepted the British officer, agreeing to a £15 weekly payment until the trial concluded and a £1,000 lump sum upon a conviction. During the trial, both the judge and defense questioned David Smith about this financial arrangement, accusing him of wanting to raise money and generate income through these horrific murders, which raised concerns of potential bias. Though the judge condemned the newspaper's actions as gross interference with the course of justice, he ruled that David Smith's testimony remained credible and unaltered by the payments. The Attorney General decided not to pursue charges against the News of the World, and eventually both defendants, Ian and Myra, pleaded not guilty. Ian took the stand for over 8 hours, displaying a cold and pedantic demeanor that alienated the jury. He admitted that he had struck Edward Evans, that 17-year-old, with an axe, but argued that the cause of death was strangulation, implying that someone else had been responsible for his murder. Myra testified for 6 hours, denying any involvement at all in any of the murders. She claimed ignorance about the significance of the photographs of Saddleworth Moor and provided evasive explanations for her presence during Leslie Ann Downey's assault and murder. Myra admitted that her behavior towards Leslie was brusque and cruel, but attributed this to fear of someone hearing the child's screams. The most damning evidence came in the form of that 16-minute audio recording of Leslie Ann Downey's final moments. Played in open court, it captured the voices of both Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, as well as the child's desperate cries for her mother as she was being raped and murdered. Myra claimed to have been absent during key moments of the crime, including the taking of explicit photographs and the murder itself. But she failed to convince the jury because they could hear her on the audio tape. She was egging it on. She was actively participating and laughing and sounded like she was enjoying it. After just 2 hours of deliberation on May 6th, the jury returned a verdict. Ian Brady was found guilty of all 3 murders, while Myra Hindley was convicted of the murders of Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans. And with the death penalty abolished 6 months earlier, both received life sentences, and this caused an outrage in Britain. The death penalty had just been abolished, and then these two commit some of the most notorious, horrific crimes in British history, and they're handed life sentences. and people were unbelievably pissed about this. In his closing remarks, Mr. Justice Atkinson condemned Myra and Ian as two sadistic killers of the utmost depravity. He described the murders as truly horrible and characterized Ian Brady as wicked beyond belief, expressing doubt about his potential for reform or parole. While he said that there was some possibility of rehabilitation for Myra Hindley, he said it would depend on her separation from Ian's influence. The judge recommended that both serve a very long time in prison before being considered for parole, but didn't specify a minimum term. Throughout the trial, both Ian and Myra and their legal teams adhered to a strategy of deception and lies. They lied constantly on the stand, not telling the truth barely ever, really, throughout the entire thing. Myra Hindley in particular was described as a quiet, controlled, impassive witness who lied remorselessly. Their calculated demeanor and refusal to accept responsibility for what they did to those children only solidified the public's perception of the two as irredeemable figures of pure evil. Following the arrests of Ian and Myra, speculation mounted about their possible involvement in other disappearances of children and teenagers. Media outlets eagerly linked them to cases such as that of Stephen Jennings, a 3-year-old boy whose body was discovered in 1988. However, his father was later convicted of his murder. Similarly, rumors in 2004 about a 6th victim, a teenage girl that Myra Hindley allegedly confessed to and murdering, were dismissed when police confirmed that Jennifer Teague, a 14-year-old who disappeared in 1964, was still alive. It is interesting, though, that Myra admitted that there was another teenage girl that the pair had abducted and murdered, and that lead seemed to have just evaporated. In 1985, journalist Fred Harrison reported that Ian Brady had suddenly admitted to murdering Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett, confirming police suspicions due to the proximity of the victims to Ian and Myra's home and the time of their disappearances. This led the Greater Manchester Police to reopen the investigation, and initial interviews with Ian Brady were met with disdain, as he denied any new confessions and said he had never told anybody that information. Nonetheless, though, the police resumed searching Saddleworth Moor, guided by old photographs taken by Ian and Myra. In November 1986, Winnie Johnson, Keith Bennett's mother, wrote a heartfelt letter to Myra Hindley pleading for her help. Myra, moved by the appeal and letter, agreed to assist the police by reviewing photographs and maps. She focused on areas near Holland Brown Knoll and Shiny Brook, but claimed she needed to revisit the moor to confirm specific sites. Despite security risks, Home Secretary Douglas Hurd approved the visit. On December 16th, Myra Hindley was flown by helicopter to the moor under heavy police protection, but her recollections failed to yield results. Public criticism of the visit as a fiasco was countered by a detective who defended the thorough search process. 3 days later, David Smith joined the police on another search of the moor, assisting in identifying areas they should search. In February of 1987, Myra confessed to her role in all 5 murders. Her videotaped statement spanned over 17 hours, but was described by a detective who witnessed it as a calculated performance, with Myra consistently claiming she was absent during all of the actual murders. When Ian was informed of Myra's confession, he initially dismissed it as a ploy, but later expressed willingness to cooperate, on the condition that he be allowed to die afterwards, to end his life, a request the authorities refused. That's right, Ian Brady was begging the authorities to give him the death penalty. He wanted death more than anything, but the authorities refused to give it to him. In July 1987, after extensive searches, police finally uncovered Pauline Reed's body just 100 yards from where Leslie Ann Downey had been buried decades prior. Ian Brady, now cooperating, then was taken to the moor, but was unable to pinpoint Keith Bennett's grave, blaming changes in the landscape over the years. And despite further searches, to this day, Keith Bennett's body has never been found. His skeletal remains are still somewhere out on the Saddleworth Moor, and nobody has any idea where he is. Ian Brady later wrote a letter to a BBC reporter claiming that he had murdered more people, including a man in Manchester and others in Scotland. However, the police found no evidence to corroborate those claims, something we're going to talk about in a second. Meanwhile, Myra Hindley made another visit to the Saddleworth Moor in March of 1987, providing more specific recollections about landmarks, but again failing to locate Keith Bennett's grave. Over the years, the efforts to locate Keith Bennett have continued intermittently. In 2003, Operation Maida employed advanced technology, including satellite imaging, but failed to uncover his remains. In 2012, rumors surfaced that Ian Brady had shared with somebody the location of Keith Bennett's final resting spot, leading to an investigation that ultimately yielded no evidence. In 2017, the police sought access to Ian Brady's locked briefcases, suspecting that they might contain clues, but the application was denied. In September 2022, new information from amateur investigator Russell Edwards prompted another search of Saddleworth Moor after he reported finding what appeared to be a human skull. However, after extensive investigation, the police found no further evidence and ended the search in October of that year, leaving Keith Bennett's final resting place a mystery to this day. Now, interestingly, Ian Brady was eventually labeled after diagnosis as a psychopath, so he was transferred out of a prison into a mental health facility, the Ashworth Hospital. And while he was there, he talked constantly to his therapists and to people that were in the facility about his desire to die, how he should never be released from prison, how he felt like he deserved incarceration. He talked about just wishing that he would, be killed by the state, but they wouldn't do it. And while he was there at that mental hospital, Ian Brady maintained a disdainful attitude towards his surroundings and refused to cooperate with psychiatrists, although he corresponded with journalists and writers through the mail. In his 2005 letters sent to a journalist, Ian referred to the murders as an existential exercise, claiming that he and Myra had shifted their focus to armed robbery by late 1964. He bitterly resented his life at the mental hospital, often describing it as a cesspit. Also, while incarcerated, Ian embarked on multiple hunger strikes after he was allegedly assaulted in 1999, but his attempts to refuse food were met with force feeding under the Mental Health Act. But despite expressing a desire for death, Ian Brady's health was monitored closely by the state, and his attempts, including a thwarted plan involving smuggled substances, were consistently intercepted and stopped before they could be successful. Ian Brady's writings, including the book The Gates of Janus, further fueled public outrage. The book analyzed serial killings and recounted his friendship with fellow inmate Graham Young, sharing his admiration for Nazi Germany. While Ian occasionally expressed regret over Myra's imprisonment and the consequences of their crimes, he never publicly apologized, instead claiming to show his remorse through actions such as transcribing texts into Braille. However, many of these efforts were undermined, including an offer to donate a kidney, which was blocked by authorities. In 2012, Ian Brady asked the authorities to transfer him out of the mental hospital and back into prison to allow him to starve himself to death, claiming he suffered from a personality disorder rather than schizophrenia. His request was denied, and the tribunal ruled he should remain at the mental hospital for continued treatment. Ian Brady passed away on May 15, 2017 from natural causes related to pulmonary disease. Cremated without a ceremony, Ian Brady's ashes were scattered at the sea under the cover of night, bringing an unceremonious end to one of Britain's most infamous criminals. It should be stated, I thought this was interesting, they actually put his ashes in a salt urn, a weighted salt urn, where they dropped it into the sea and then it dissolved and his ashes went into the sea. I'd never heard of that. I thought that was interesting. And also, Ian Brady requested, I can't remember the name of the song, but he requested while he was being cremated that they play this old classical orchestral song, which signifies in music the person's arrival to hell. Actually, let me just look it up really quick. Yeah, so he wanted to be cremated to the Witches' Sabbath portion of Hector Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. And the composer's notes of that specific portion of that song that Ian wanted to be cremated to read, "The musician sees himself at a witch's sabbath in the midst of a hideous gathering of shades, sorcerers, and monsters of every kind who have come together for his funeral. Strange sounds, groans, outbursts of laughter, distant shouts which seem to be answered by more shouts. The beloved melody appears once more, but has now lost its noble and shy character. It is now no more than a vulgar dance tune, trivial and grotesque. It is she who is coming to the Sabbath. Roar of delight at her arrival. She joins the diabolical orgy. The funeral knell tolls, burlesque parody of the Dies Irae, the dance of the witches." So they denied that request. So he's dead, but Myra Hindley actually died years earlier than him in 2002, and her attempts to overturn her conviction began immediately after her trial, but appeal after appeal, she was unsuccessful. Although she corresponded with Ian Brady for years until 1971, she eventually ended their relationship, having fallen in love with Patricia Cairns, a prison officer that was at the Holloway institution she was held at. This relationship, while controversial, wasn't uncommon at the time, as relationships between staff and inmates were reportedly widespread. Myra's status was also later downgraded from Category A to Category B, allowing her limited freedoms, including a supervised walk on Hampstead Heath. This outing sparked public outrage and earned the prison governor, Dorothy Wing, a rebuke from the Home Secretary. And Myra Hindley actually tried to escape prison. That officer that she was in love with, Patricia Cairns, and other inmates came up with a plan where they were actually going to escape prison. But the prison keys were intercepted. Patricia Cairns received a 6-year sentence for her involvement. Patricia fell in love with the convicted murderer. She tried to help her escape, and she went from being someone who works at the prison to being in prison herself. Now, obviously, even though Myra tried to get parole for herself so she could leave prison, every time she said she wanted something like that to happen, the families of the victims would protest, and there would be public outcry and anger because there's just no way that she should ever have been let out of prison. And in 2002, Myra Hindley died at age 60 from bronchial pneumonia and complications of angina, which brought to an end decades of debate over her potential freedom. Her cremation faced significant backlash, and many local undertakers in the area refused to handle her remains. They didn't want Myra Hindley's body in their crematorium. They didn't want to touch her. They didn't want to be anywhere near her. So that was a whole struggle in itself just to get her cremated. And 4 months later, Myra Hindley's ashes were quietly scattered by her former lover, Patricia Cairns, in Stalybridge Country Park, which is a location extremely close to the Saddleworth Moor, that location that is now forever tied to Myra and Ian's crimes. David Smith, that key witness in the Moors murders trial who was there for the final murder, faced public scorn for profiting financially from his involvement in the crimes. His wife, Maureen, Myra Hindley's sister, endured relentless harassment, including a physical assault while she was pregnant, their home being vandalized, and loads of hate mail. Unable to trust the safety of her own children, Maureen's life became a constant battle, and David Smith's post-trial life has remained troubled. In 1969, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for stabbing a man during a fight, an act he attributed to the abuse he suffered after the trial. The same year, his kids were placed in foster care, and Maureen was ostracized from her community, receiving no support even from her own family. She divorced David Smith in 1973, remarried, and rebuilt her life, though she remained tied to the shadow of her sister, Myra Hindley, visiting her regularly in prison before Maureen ultimately died from a brain hemorrhage in the year 1980. The impact of the Moors murders rippled through the families of the victims as well. Pauline Reed's mother was hospitalized for mental health issues and heavily sedated during her daughter's funeral in 1987. Leslie Ann Downey's mother, a tireless campaigner against Hindley's release, succumbed to liver cancer in 1999, her doctors attributing her illness to the immense stress of her loss.
Leslie Ann Downey was a bright, intelligent little girl, and like all normal children, she was trustful too. It was because of that she is no longer with us. Her trust was betrayed. Someone committed a foul crime, and we all hope and pray that the person or persons responsible for this evil deed will be brought to justice and receive the punishment they deserve. But this deed is not only a crime, it is a terrible sin, and the person or persons responsible will have to reckon with the divine court of justice and face the wrath and punishment of God. And that, I fear, will be very terrible indeed.
Keith Bennett's mother, Winnie Johnson, spent decades searching Saddleworth Moor for her son's remains, a quest that only ended with her death in 2012. Sheila and Patrick Kilbride, who divorced 5 years after their son John's murder, grappled with grief for the rest of their lives. And in 1987, the Manchester City Council demolished Ian and Myra's home on Wardlebrook Avenue to shield local residents from ongoing media attention. Decades later, in 2017, it was revealed that Pauline Reed's remains, including her jawbone, had been kept at the University of Leeds without her family's knowledge, prompting an apology from the Greater Manchester Police. Her remains were finally reburied in 2018, bringing a small measure of closure to a legacy of pain and tragedy that spanned generations. The chilling evidence presented during the Moors murders trial, including photographs and that tape recording of Leslie Ann Downey's torture, solidified the enduring infamy of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Ian's lack of remorse and his stated preference to remain in prison kept him out of the spotlight. But in contrast, Myra Hindley's repeated attempts to get herself released from prison made her a lightning rod for public outrage, especially as she withheld confessions regarding Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett for 2 decades. Her role in the crimes, which defied traditional gender norms, fueled perceptions of her as inherently evil. Her mugshot, often likened to Medusa, became emblematic of female depravity and was frequently used to stoke societal fears around serial killings and child abuse. The 1997 Sensation art exhibition further inflamed public sentiments with the controversial painting Myra, a reproduction of Myra Hindley's mugshot made entirely from children's handprints. Even Myra's own mother believed that she should remain in prison for her entire life, fearing for her safety if she ever were to be released. Many viewed Myra as even more evil than Ian Brady, cementing her place as a symbol of moral panic and a target for societal retribution. So that's the story of the Moors murders. Ian and Myra are dead. A lot of the family members of the victims are dead. Keith Bennett's body remains missing. But what about those additional murders that Ian Brady and Myra Hindley confessed to over the years? Well, Ian Brady often spoke of alleged early acts of violence and murders, though many of these claims remain unverified. A lot of them were never even investigated really in the first place. One of the first incidents that Ian Brady has claimed he was responsible for occurred reportedly in his childhood, when he struck a young child with the wooden seat of a swing, causing severe bleeding. Panicked, Ian said that he fled the scene, believing that the child was dead. It's not known if this was a real story, if this actually happened, this kid who died, but investigators were never able to match this story to an actual death. Another event, according to Ian, involved a dangerous street game called Catch-a-Hudgie, in which children would jump onto the back of passing vehicles. Ian Brady claimed to have witnessed a boy fall under a van and saw a blood-filled child's shoe at the scene. As a teenager, Ian also admitted that he allegedly murdered a boy who reported him to the police for theft and buried the body of the boy at a bomb site, though no evidence has ever been found to support this claim. Similarly, Ian said that he stabbed a man in Manchester in 1958, but didn't specify whether the attack was fatal. And Ian eventually confessed to more crimes as well, including several alleged murders that he claimed happened during his relationship with Myra Hindley, none of which have been investigated really or substantiated. Ian claimed to have thrown a woman into the Rockdale Canal, whose death was ruled a self-unaliving. And he mentioned killing a young man on Saddleworth Moor in 1964 amongst the couple's crime spree, though no missing person matched Ian's description of his victim. Ian also described shooting a hiker in Loch Long, Scotland, killing them, and stabbing a man in Glasgow who was attacking a homeless woman. Yet, police were never able to match any missing persons reports or murder victims to Ian's claims. But it makes sense to me. This is a question that I still have about this case. I mean, the biggest question is, where's Keith Bennett's body? That child deserves to be found, and he deserves to be given a proper burial. I mean, we were out there at the memorial, you're going to see in a moment, and it was unbelievably sad to consider that he's never been found, and his family members are dying, and as time goes on, it just seems more and more likely that Keith will never be located. But it also, another mystery about this whole case is the possibility that there were more victims of this crime spree. And I mean, it makes sense when you actually consider what happened. Obviously, Myra and Ian were depraved. They were horrible people, and they found deep pleasure in abducting, victimizing, and murdering children. Obviously, in the Manchester area, there are a number of missing children's reports from around the time of those murders. The bodies have never been found, the children have never been located, so you could potentially link those to Ian Brady and Myra Hindley if, you know, there was like a real investigation. I'm sure that they have been investigated already. Just the stories of Ian and Myra, the fact that they wouldn't even admit to the crimes that they were questioned about, you know, Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett, they didn't admit to victimizing and killing those children for decades. It makes me wonder, like, how many kids they could have possibly killed, even if it's one additional child that they never brought up, that the police never linked to them, that no one thought could be linked to them. I mean, these could be crimes in other countries too. They traveled a lot. I don't know. I'm going to read you, though, right now, this article that was published by the Daily Mail on January 20th, 2008 by author Sue Reed. The title of the article is Did Myra Hindley murder 17 more children? And this clip from the article is pretty interesting. It involves some information about someone who legally represented Ian Brady during his time when he was alive in the mental hospital. I'm going to read you this quote here. For the past 18 months, he, Ian Brady, has been counseled by a colorful Italy-based lawyer named Giovanni Di Stefano, nicknamed the Devil's Advocate because he also represented Saddam Hussein and Britain's worst serial killer, Dr. Harold Shipman. It was Giovanni Di Stefano who this week dropped the bombshell claim that he suspected there was at least one other young victim of the Moors murderers. He said that she was a teenager of 14 in 1964 with the initials JT who would run away from Oldham. They talk about this misidentification of JT and how they're investigating if this Jenny T was someone killed by the couple. And according to this article, that attorney sent a package to Ian Brady while he was incarcerated with photographs of children that disappeared mysteriously from the area at the same time. The article states, Di Stefano says that the envelope includes 2 other pictures of girls who also mysteriously disappeared from the same area of northern England during the terrible years of the serial murders by Brady and Hindley. You must be prepared for Brady to pick out all 3 of the girls, said Mr. Di Stefano last night. I have asked him if he recognizes all or any of them as his and Myra Hindley's victims. After all, what the public does not know is that 5 other children went missing in the area of the Moors murders, quite apart from the girl I will only call JT. There were also 11 unexplained deaths of other youngsters under 21 during the period that Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were active, including one who lived just a few doors from the father of Myra. A coincidence? Maybe. But all, or any, could have been murdered by them. Talking to the lawyer, the article continues with his quote, "Why would they stop at 5? He asks. The lawyer believes that the moment has come when Brady will, at last, tell the truth. In 1987, the killer contacted the BBC and gave incomplete information about 5 other murders. They included a man from Manchester and a woman whose body was thrown in a local canal. The police were unable to find out more, and Brady would not elaborate." The article then talks about Ian Brady's living conditions and his hunger strikes, but it continues with some interesting information on Myra Hindley. It all started when Myra Hindley had a whispered conversation before her death with another inmate, Linda Calvi, at High Point Prison near Haverhill in Suffolk. Calvi, who is also represented by Di Stefano, became known as the Black Widow after being jailed for shooting an ex-lover. She says she's innocent. In an 8-page statement made after the prison encounter, Linda Calvi, the Black Widow, claimed that Myra Hindley confessed to another murder of a child while she had her hair styled by Calvi during prisoner recreation time. The killer suddenly said how sad it was to disappear off the face of the earth and nobody bother. Calvi responded by laughing and countered, "In my position, I think it would be wonderful to disappear." She said Hindley then told her how she and Ian went out for a drive and picked up a girl in her teens who was thumbing a lift to Kilburn, North London, to see a friend after a row with their family. When asked by Calvi why she did not mention the girl to police when she had finally admitted to murdering 2 more victims in 1987, she allegedly said, "Would you declare somebody nobody had ever mentioned?" Hindley apparently refused to divulge the girl's name and only gave a rough age and physical description of the victim. So yeah, that's an interesting article with some nuggets of information. Ian Brady confessing to more murders, Myra Hindley confessing to an additional murder. There's so much information here. And these are just questions that we'll never really have answers to because Myra Hindley and Ian Brady are both dead. They're not coming back anytime soon to actually provide context or information about these crimes. And it should be noted that both of them withheld information. It's proven that they refused to acknowledge other crimes that they were involved with while they were alive until one of them started talking about it, really, and the other one was forced to admit to it. So it's not like they'd be going out of their way to identify every person they ever victimized. So needless to say, I don't know if I 100% believe that there is a 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, however many additional victims of the Moors murders, but it's a valid possibility and one that I don't know if we'll ever have resolution to. I mean, I don't know how you'd get answers. But reading all of this and being in the area in England, the Moors, Saddleworth Moor, was a place that I knew that we had to visit. It's a place that has called my name for years, a place that I've wanted to investigate. And I do want to state again, in this documentary, we are going to be employing paranormal investigation techniques. We've been doing this for over a decade now. And I want to state that we're not going out there to specifically speak to any victims, to anybody that's directly involved in these crimes. I'm going out there with the intent to just see what happens. to talk to whatever energies, maybe they're ancient energies or other spirits, or I don't know how the spirit world works. I don't know how the paranormal works. I don't know what it is or what causes it, but we just wanted to try. We wanted to see if we could get some answers. And so on a cold night in England last August, we headed out to the Saddleworth Moor for an investigation. Hey everybody, it's Colin here. Thank you for watching today's video. Hello to all the new subscribers and hello to the rest of our beautiful, wonderful, spooky family. As you know, every single week here on the channel, we give away a free gift bag to one lucky viewer of the show. And this week, to enter the contest, all you have to do is like today's video, let's smash that like button, and comment "disturbing" in the comment section below. I'm gonna give y'all 10 seconds to do this now. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So go comment. You can comment multiple times. It helps the video so much. But anyways, let's get back to today's video. Thank you for listening to my little spiel. I love you guys so much, and stay spooky. All right, guys, so we hiked to the top of the moor up here to the flatland area. But as you can hear on the mic, it is incredibly windy. I thought maybe we could find an area that we could have a little bit of shelter from the wind, but it's completely flat up here. So instead of investigating up top, we're just gonna go back down a little bit so that you guys can actually hear what's happening. It's a good walk. Yeah. So right now, guys, we are up on top of the Saddleworth Moor. In the Ian Brady, Myra Hindley story, this is the most notorious location of all, where they buried their victims. And if you'll remember, Keith, the young victim, his body was never located. So there are a couple of different theories as to what may have happened to Keith. I've read that some people speculate he's up here in the moor somewhere, which you can see is pitch black now, and it's like really big. You can't really see how big it is. And other people have speculated that he's in another location that there's a photo of Ian Brady standing on top of a rock. Cops have never dug there. It's pretty bizarre. So with tonight's investigation, we are handling this with love and care. We are not coming up to the moors to speak to any of the victims. We are not coming up to the moors to be insensitive. We are here to try tell this story properly and to also see if we can help solve this mystery. The reason why we're up here is to try and figure out where Keith's body is. It's a mystery that's haunted the people of this area and of England for decades now. And in our videos, we have been
performing paranormal investigations for years. So we believe in what we do. We believe in this evidence. If you're watching and you don't, that is completely fine. Everybody is entitled to their own opinions, and I completely respect if you want to write us off as crazy. We are going to apply the tools and techniques that we use all the time to see if we can gather any new evidence on what may have happened to Keith, and where his final resting place may be. So just take that with a grain of salt. We also have a couple Ovilus devices. These are devices that react to EMF changes in the environment. Weirdly enough, it said suspected widespread. But it's got a weird mystical feel up here. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird being out here. The story's disturbing. With all these kids, I mean, just going missing. I can only imagine what it was like for the families coming out here all the time and digging in the grounds here, trying to find their own kids. I mean, that's, even just that alone has to leave an emotional stain on these grounds. So it's definitely got a strange, I don't know if you guys can feel it through the screen, just a really odd energy. This has got to be one of the most notorious places in England. But all right, to any of the spirits here on the Saddleworth Moor, my name is Colin. My name's Connor. And we're here tonight to try to figure out what happened to the children out here. The victims of Myra Henley and Ian Brady. Do any of the spirits or energies out here, do you know anything about what happened out here back in the 1960s?
Squirmish.
Tonight, we want to ask if anybody up here knows what happened to Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans. Keith Bennett's body has never been found. We know what happened to the other four. So if there are any spirits who were up here who witnessed those events between 1963 and 1965, I would really appreciate if you could help us figure out what happened to Keith.
Mafia.
Are there still victims of Ian Brady and Myra Henley out here? Watch lights. Work table.
Is there anybody out here with us right now?
Do any of you guys, or girls, or whatever you are that's up here, does anybody know what happened to Keith? We want to know what happened to Keith and where his body is.
Some lady here.
There's a lady here? Who are you? Are you an ancient spirit? Missed it.
Felix Diesel. 60.
The 60s.
Are you saying that they missed the body?
Maybe you never knew the boy's Travail. Maybe you never heard the boy's name, but do you remember all of those children being brought out here and the terrible things that happened to them out in the moor right over there? that? That was like a...
In your sleep.
Wartime. We're looking for any clues about what may have happened to that little boy named Keith. Is he buried up here somewhere? To judge. Penny. Teresa.
Six.
I will talk to you.
Falseness.
What do you mean by
Stand up.
Stand up? What do you mean by 6? Was there another victim that they never admitted to murdering up here?
What do you keep looking at?
Keep hearing something over here. Did you hear that? It's like right here, like a rock. Rock being thrown. Night dress, perhaps it suits. Oh, dude, what the hell? It said breakfast on here and coffee. It's kind of weird, no? I really want to help bring some closure to the families that are still being affected by this. Can you tell us anything about what happened to Keith?
Don't tell.
Not enough. Alcoholic. Surely.
Said Penny?
Moles.
Wasn't it Keith that his mom didn't know that he went out in the town to get some like pocket change? He was working.
Copywriter.
Well, that's bizarre if that's true.
I mean, not the same currency, but still.
I don't remember that, so I'd have to look, but that would be crazy.
Pep.
Copywriter Pep True Shirley Moles. Is there any way you could give us a clue about the landscape? Say it out loud. Nautilus. Any sort of a clue about where that little boy Keith's body might be?
Hermetic.
Just vanished.
He did just vanish from the city.
That's bizarre. That little boy, Keith, just vanished. That's why we're trying to ask anybody up here questions.
That's true.
If you would have any idea where they would be. Can you give us any direction or tell us some sort of landmark to look near?
Turbofan?
Turbofan.
There's a bunch of windmills around here.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Turbofan.
As we were coming into the town, there's a bunch of windmills everywhere.
I didn't even think about that.
The big wind turbines.
Are you
6?
6 again? 6 again. It keeps saying 6. Crud. Turbofan crud work. Are you saying that young boy's body might be buried near a turbofan, like one of those big
wind turbines?
Yeah, one of those big white wind turbines that are around here? Specifically. And why do you keep saying Dennis? Keep saying 6. Do you keep saying 6 because there was another victim that was never found? It also said 13th and menacing.
Wasn't he about 13 years old?
Reese. Let me see. Yeah, Keith was 12.
I'm freezing up here.
I know, it's especially in...
It's like the windiest day we've been here, and we're up on top of a fucking mountain.
And it's fucking cold as hell. We're about to walk a little bit further into the moor. Whoever's been speaking with us, can you tell us anything about...
I lost it.
Partly, I lost it. Jujube? Jujube? Can you tell us anything about where a body might be out here? Any sort of landmark? Or coagulate. Any sort of landmark or area? I know you said the wind turbine, but is there anything else? Aqueduct. There's a reservoir.
Yeah.
Literally right there.
There are children here.
There are children here returning. I hate to ask this, but... Mourn. Could you tell us... I'm pretty sure he killed Pauline with a razor to the neck. Pauline? Calgary. Could you tell us your name before we leave? I'm so sad and sorry to hear that there are children here. So at this point, it's really fucking windy and cold up here. So we're gonna walk down a little bit and try to find a place that has more cover from the wind so that we can do a spirit box and then an Estes method. But whoever's been here, thank you. Just follow us down the path here through the moor.
Yes.
Alright everybody, so Connor went back to the car. He was just feeling uncomfortable, a lot of walking, and it's really cold out and he didn't have a jacket. I'm sitting here and I'm going to do a spirit box session and hopefully get some more answers before we do the Estes out here. And while I was walking, this is what it said. I'm beside you, background, you're going the wrong way. See my shadow, sad little whine. Enjoy. Caddish, nostrils, stratify, enjoy, Dean, and he lost, academic defeated. Alright, to whoever's here, can you please tell me what your name is?
I don't.
Do you remember the children who lost their lives out here? Do you remember those kids who were buried out here? Yes. Can you tell me one of those kids' names?
Can you say that again? Is there still a body buried out here? Some people think that one of those victims' bodies is buried out here. More than one of them. Large group. Flutter, no love. Are there more than one person's body buried out here? They're buried up on top of those hills? Pawpaw. Do you remember a little cute kid named Keith? Is he buried out here? All these vivid memories. Do you remember the names of the man and woman who came out here and buried those children? Liquor and Dogwood. I heard Ian, I think. Do you remember Ian Brady and Myra Hindley? And the families just really desperately want to know what happened to Keith. His body is supposed to be out here somewhere. Is he still out here? Disagree. Locked up. When I asked... Oh, right when I asked about Ian and Myra Hindley, locked up. Yeah, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were sent to prison, but they're both dead now. You disagree with that statement? Where is Keith's body buried? That little boy. Hallway. Holding room. Is his body by a large group of rocks, like a hill or a mountain? What can you tell me about what happened when they brought that young 12-year-old boy out here? Ian and Myra. After they killed that 13-year-old, what did they do with his body? Oh, I thought I said 13. But the 6 again! Oh my god, what the hell? And that thing just reset by itself. 6 again, guys. What do you mean with the number 6? Were there 6 victims here? Explain to me why you keep saying 6. Is there a reason? Progressively expanded. I am closer. 6 I heard. Holy. Onion. Can you please state clearly what you meant by saying 6 so many times? I heard bodies on the moor to this day. Can you give us any clues about the area where that 12-year-old boy Keith's body is to this day? Is it here or is it somewhere else? Six, I heard. Missile formula. Yeah, look at this slug. A question that everybody asks that there still is no answer to. Was Myra Hindley involved in the murders of these kids? And even the assaults? Did she ever any of these children? Did Myra assault these children? Rope. Right when I asked that. Rope. Dangerous. So Myra participated in the rapes and murders? Now, this piece of evidence is actually pretty disturbing because according to Ian Brady, Myra Hindley strangled Leslie Ann Downey to death with a length of silk cord, which I guess you could count as a rope of sorts. He also claimed that afterwards, Myra actually took the cord around with her and played with it while the two were out in public, while they were drinking in pubs, shopping and hanging out, reveling in the deadly secret that the rope represented. So, was this referring to the fact that Myra indeed did participate in these murders? I don't know, but the timing is incredibly bizarre. Delivery. Oh my god. These just hit at the exact same time. A child delivery rope. Diana Verbal. Yeah, people know that Myra delivered the children sometimes for Ian and helped him procure them. But while they were out here in the moors, did Myra participate in the attack on these kids before they were murdered? Force. She always told everybody that she did not participate. Was she involved? Can you say yes or confirm that? Hidden. Be smarter. I think I just heard you're correct. What did Myra do to the children? Can you tell me in detail what Myra participated in? What did she do? Incredible agreement. Teaspoon must go. Just in time. What did Myra do? Did Myra beat the kids? Did she participate in them? What did she do? Can you clearly tell me what she did? We have to get going, but a final question. What happened to Keith, that little 12-year-old boy's body? Where did they put his body?
It's a horrible thing.
Where's Keith?
Lost.
Alright guys, so this has been really interesting. I want to thank all of the spirits or energies. Maybe you were victims, maybe you've been here 1,000 years, I don't know who you are. But I want to thank you for speaking with me tonight. And we're going to just walk a little bit further and you can follow us and keep talking to us. Hope. I scream. It's just eerie to think back in the 1960s, this road would not have been this used. And how desolate this is. Just seeing that, bug. Just seeing that, like if kids screamed out here, nobody would... 8. If kids screamed out here, nobody would be here to hear them. Sounds like Myra was involved. She's always denied it. People think she was. And we're gonna go do an Estes. Some really interesting stuff though, and this area has just got a really sad, bleak vibe to it. Alright guys, so we are actually here in the Saddleworth Moor. Actually inside of the moor, surrounded by the whatever this type of... Oh my god! It just said take a seat right when we did that. Much effort. But we're gonna do an Estes out here and try to see if we can figure out any more about what we just learned. Basically, my session was alluding to the fact that Myra was participating in the assaults, and it's kept talking about 6 and like an additional victim. Usually we would wear a blindfold, but since the only thing we have on this trip is the Gansfield goggles, which are these red goggles that people use in experiments, and I didn't want them to seem disrespectful at all, I'm just going to close my eyes. But obviously not only is the light blocking Connor's face, but I'm going to be tilted down. So let's do this, man.
Alright. Is there anyone here with us right now?
Me.
Who is me?
Look at these punks.
Who are you?
What?
Who are you?
He won't answer you. That was a woman.
Well, who are you?
I can't just say it.
Lots of
bodies.
Keep looking.
How many bodies are out here?
Already told you. 16, 6, 29. Oh my God, 3 numbers in a row. And it's all the same man's voice. 16, 6, 29. Yeah, run.
Well, we got 6 a lot, so we thought you might be alluding to that there were 6 victims. Is that true?
You bitch. Looking back on it, huh? Sit, dog.
We wanted to ask about the Moors murders. Ian Brady and Myra.
I just heard it. Everyone just calls them the killings.
Yeah, the killings.
Not nice.
Can you tell me?
Don't know specifics.
You don't know any specifics?
These Moors are full of them.
Did you see them out here killing and burying the kids out here?
Yeah. You're never safe.
So, can you tell me on those days that they were out here, were both of them...
Orange, mate.
Were both of them involved in the killings? Like, were they actively both murdering?
Mommy! I'd run him. Daddy?
Who is this?
You've been naughty. Like a woman's voice.
Is this Myra?
She used to come here. She was Beelzebub.
Was Myra the real evil person in this story?
No.
So was Ian? Baby crying.
Go on, get out.
Do you not like that they found all the bodies here?
They haven't.
There is one more that you never told them.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I watched them cut it.
You watched them cut the person up?
Out here with an X-Acto knife. They beat him.
Both of them did?
Met them.
Down.
Ben quintuplets.
Can you tell me where Keith's body is?
Somewhere on the planet.
Well, I got that.
Make believe. I'm not looking. Don't know why you are. Dude, this is crazy.
Court. Downtown court.
Quarter.
They're over there.
Keith is?
It just said, I couldn't hear it, but it said behind the something. I don't know what you're asking.
Quarter.
So Keith is buried further in?
Oh, I just heard a crying. Buried with no head.
So, is there murders that everyone doesn't know about?
Secret. Damn it. They tease us.
Was it another child? Hello.
No, Daddy. Only one.
No daddy, only one.
Winnipeg.
Who am I speaking to?
Think, boy. Think. Daddy?
I am thinking, but you're not really telling me enough.
Prick. No more teddies. He's not here.
Keith isn't here?
Kentucky.
Kentucky.
Haven't seen.
Have they dug around where Keith
Walking the
is?
dog.
People do walk their dogs around here a lot.
Never seen him.
They've never seen Keith's body or where they.
It's embarrassing.
My brother messenger.
Might as well just suck it.
Whoever this is, you're being kind of an asshole.
Then, wait, one more thing.
What's wrong with you?
Fuck you.
Yeah, fuck you too.
One more thing. Fuck you.
We're here to help these kids.
Oh, well, on deck, right?
And tell their story.
Yeah.
Because someone stole their voice. Keith was never found, and we want.
Oh, a kid's voice. Check the rock.
Keith, is that
yeah.
you? Where are the rocks?
So much pain.
Can you tell me where the rocks are?
Get an adult. It's so important. It's so important at the rock.
We are adults. You can tell us. You don't have to be afraid.
They'll never find it. Go away.
We'll leave here in a little bit. Is there anything you want to tell us? Alan.
Yeah.
Well, go on.
Murder was fun.
That's really fucked up. Whoever this is saying that.
All I wanted was to be a big tough guy.
Is this Ian?
My teddy.
Ian, if this is you, this is your last chance. You're dead. Help us.
Go back to Louisiana.
Help us tell your story. Clear up some stuff. Just tell us where Keith is.
Is that supposed to be fun? Look all weekend, boy.
Scanning. Do you want us to go scan wherever Keith's body may be? Should we scan in the area where...
see it, mate.
Should we scan in the areas where people have never searched before?
Won't see shit.
Well, we can try.
Get out. Or maybe,
Or maybe what?
Ugh, it's my graveyard.
Ian, you're a real prick.
You know, some people you don't get along with? A woman.
What y'all did to those kids is terrible. And I'm glad
they're miserable.
And I'm glad you died in prison.
Go camping.
No, I'm not gonna camp out here.
Mommy! Again, Mom, it sounded like a child.
Who's the child that's speaking right now?
You won't know or care.
Well, I might. Is this one of the victims?
Just another number.
The second girl?
Buried off of the trailhead? Literally, buried off of the trailhead? Ugh. I got a weird voice that sounded like it was speaking in my ear. It was like, I don't know how to describe that, man, but that just gave me a creep.
Is that who I'm speaking to?
She.
What the fuck?
You just wouldn't know. You're curious, aren't you? Can't unteach a perv.
We're so sorry about what happened to you.
Satisfactory.
It's a tragedy what happened to you.
Stargazing.
You were such a sweet girl. And
you saved them.
And you did not deserve that.
It's a creepy man's voice.
Robinson.
Them teenagers went under. A creepy man's voice. Bro. Them teenagers went under.
Is there anything else you can tell us?
You've learned it all already.
Adults.
He's north.
Adults. Is Keith north of here?
Here.
West.
He's northwest?
Thank you.
You're
this
welcome.
area needs a cleansing, mate.
I believe it. Some messed up stuff has happened here. Is there anything we can do for you?
They left. The dog shit.
Yes.
Is there anything we can do for you before we leave?
The girl, Alice.
What about her? What about Alice?
Infrastructure.
1940. There's so many voices. Alright, I'm gonna be done. Freezing cold.
Yeah.
And dude,
you were screaming mommy?
Uh-huh.
And I said, is this a girl that got murdered out here? And it said the second.
I hate to even bring it in there,
Action.
but there was a really weird man's voice.
Yeah, it was like I was talking to the kids, and then I was talking to Ian too. And that's when it was like, one last thing. F you. And I was like, F you too, you're a prick.
Yeah, I can't. I remember hearing that voice, and it was like long sentences.
That shit was freaky. Very accurate.
Well, to anybody out here on the Saddleworth Moor, if these are victims, I'm so sorry for what happened to you, and hopefully we can find peace. But if this does happen to be the energy of someone more evil who used to frequent this place, I hope you're paying for what you did.
Underwater.
Okay. Should we go back?
You should.
So, obviously, one of the biggest unsolved mysteries when dealing with the Moors murderers case is the final resting place of Keith Bennett. However, during our investigation, a new possibility arose. Could his body have possibly been placed into the water nearby? I mean, that theory isn't impossible. This large body of water is located right next to where the children's bodies were found. and we received a lot of evidence talking about being underwater that evening.
Any sort of landmark or area? I know you said the wind turbine, but is there anything else? Aqueduct. There's a reservoir.
Yeah.
Literally right there.
From heaven, and I say
So is that why Keith Bennett's body has never been found? Have people been looking in all the wrong places? Did Ian and Myra switch up where they disposed of the victim's body for this one dump, purposefully to throw everybody off? I don't know. It is an intriguing possibility, but we knew we had one more place to stop at in the Saddleworth Moor area that night before we left.
Last time someone brought something out here for him.
So right now we're about 4 minutes from where we were doing that Estes session, really only about 5 minutes from where all the bodies were buried. And there's this memorial for Keith that has been established. It's been here for a very long time. And there's actually photographs of Keith's mother who passed away visiting this spot. And as you can see, there are tons of flowers and tributes for Keith, a lot of them old and rotted. But Connor and I wanted to come leave some flowers for Keith out here because at the end of the day, we're not only doing this video to get justice for these families and to find answers here, but we're so profoundly affected by these cases when we cover them. And we just always want to show respect to those, especially people who died such terrible deaths like Keith. Keith, buddy, if you're out here, hopefully they find you one day. We're trying here. But we love you. And what happened to you was terrible, but we're fighting for you. Love you, buddy.
And Keith, we want you to know that your story's not forgotten, and it didn't end with your mother that were being the only people that are trying to find you. We hope you found some peace in the afterlife, and just want you to know that people still care about you.
So there are all these questions still. Where's Keith Bennett? Where are the bodies? Were there additional victims? And a place that comes up time and time again in the Moor's murder story that we haven't really talked about is Ramshaw Rocks. Now, the Ramshaw Rocks are about an hour and a half out of Manchester, and they're an ancient, rock outcropping. I don't know exactly how to describe it, with a bunch of extremely distinct rocks and stone formations. There's a serpent rock. There are these rocks that, are really identifiable. And remember how earlier in this video I told you about Ian Brady and Myra Hindley? A big thing that led to the discovery of the children's bodies was analyzing those photographs of them out on Saddleworth Moor, because they frequently posed for photos near the locations where children's bodies were buried. Well, just recently, a few years ago, a number of new photographs of Ian and Myra were published and given to the press, and it showed them at Ramshaw Rocks, this place that's somewhat close to Manchester, and they're posing in similar fashions to the way that they were posing at Saddleworth Moor. They're sitting on rocks, they're taking pictures in front of, seemingly really random fence posts and out in fields. I know that there's been a little minor investigating around the Ramshaw Rocks, but there's never been like a full-on Saddleworth Moor style search by the authorities for Keith Bennett's body there. They've never gone out, with ground penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, and it's a huge thing that people who study this whole story think is a possibility. that Keith Bennett's body, along with, if there's bodies of other victims, they could be buried out by Ramshaw rocks. I mean, just looking at the photos, they look so similar to the photos that were taken next to the other grave sites on Saddleworth Moor. So there is a possibility that Keith's body could be in that area. Now, you have to remember as well, Saddleworth Moor is a huge area, and the Ramshaw Rocks area is huge as well. I know that there have been some people that have gone out and found some of the pinpointed locations of where Myra and Ian were, and they've done some amateur digging and investigating. They haven't found anything, but still, it's just like Pauline Reed's body, how she was found 100 yards from Leslie Ann Downey's body, and investigators would never have known that she was there unless Ian and Myra guided them. So who knows? I mean, it's a huge area, the Ramshaw Rocks. And before we finished this investigation, we knew we had to head to the Ramshaw Rocks to investigate ourselves.
So it's a really windy day, but of all the places that Ian Brady and Myra Hindley used to visit, the Saddleworth Moor was the place where they visited the most. Obviously, that's where they buried their victims. The assaults happened, but they still haven't found Keith. And recently, a lot of people have been speculating that Keith may not be buried out on the moor at all, but could be buried somewhere in this area at the Ramshaw Rocks. These are some ancient rock formations. Some of them have carvings in them. People have claimed they have mystical uses and ties into the occult. But there are some photographs of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley that were recently unearthed, and they are in this area sitting on these rocks behind us. There's a specific rock called the Serpent Stone that they're seen sitting on. And there are also some photos of Ian Brady kind of down in the, oh my God, it's so windy, down in the valley kind of area, pointing at the ground. Same with Myra. And as you know, throughout this story, those photos that were unearthed of the Saddleworth Moor, those photos were what led to the discovery of the corpses, because they would frequently photograph themselves posing near the grave sites. I don't know. Could this be the place where Keith's body sits today? What do you think?
I mean, at this point, I feel like we have to accept any possibility about where Keith's body might be. They've searched the moors for years. I mean, these crimes happened in the late 60s. So, I mean, it's always a possibility. They were really confident posing for pictures on top of these grave sites, and one of the pictures just happened to be out here. I mean, I think it's a pretty big possibility.
Yeah, it's interesting that the authorities never thoroughly searched this area. I mean, it's a huge area with so many potential places where someone could bury something. And I know that citizens have done searches out here, but they've just never come up with anything. But I feel like in my heart of hearts, this is where Keith is, somewhere around here. So we're gonna do a real quick spirit box session.
Xbox.
Right here.
FM.
I just want to ask anybody, any spirits that might be out here, ancient spirits. Is there a body buried out here? Is there a body buried out here, a human body?
Under the rock.
Can you say yes, there's a body?
Body. Is Keith's body buried out here? It's okay, man.
Witch on the rock? Is there a boy named Keith's body out here? Sounds like you're saying there's a body out here. Can you say the name of the person that the body belongs to? Whose body is it? What other secrets are out here? We heard last night that there might be, you guys, if you're here, you might remember Ian and Myra. They came here a lot. People were telling us there were 6 victims, but there's only 5 known. Was there another victim that you know of?
Lonely, 4. There's 4 buried out on the moor.
Very passionate. That's what they
By the rest of it?
6
of them. 6 of them.
Is Keith's body buried out here? A little 12-year-old boy named Keith?
Video. Escaping me.
No escaping me.
They did something.
They did something.
Can you tell us anything else about the body that might be buried out here? The moor?
What, 10 minutes?
Anything else? Well, guys, we would have spent more time out here. Oh, Jesus. We would have spent more time out here, but we have a train to catch to Paris, and you don't even want to know. These are the roads that we're driving on. They are insanely tiny 1-lane roads
through the country on the sides of like mountains.
But it's beautiful out here.
But it's beautiful. Keith, buddy, if you're out here. If there's a 6th victim of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley that's out here, we're so sorry that you've never been found, and we're fighting for you so that hopefully they can reignite a search and search this area. We're gonna pray for you and send so much good love and light, and once again, we're so sorry about what happened. It's beautiful up here.
It might be one of the prettiest views I've ever seen.
Look at that.
Kind of kind of reminds me of Windows XP.
I can see that. Well, let's get to the train, man.
So at the end of the day, there are so many questions about the Moors murders that are still in the public consciousness. How many victims? What happened to Keith Bennett? How involved was Myra Hindley? What exactly happened? You're trusting the word of killers, so everything is taken with a grain of salt. And at the end of the day, these questions, it seems like, will forever remain unanswered. All I know is that the Saddleworth Moor is an incredibly eerie location. It's a place that's stained with that dark energy, with that negativity, a place that will forever be marked as the dumping ground of some of the most notorious serial killers in world history. That's the legacy of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Terror, torture, and pain. The families of the victims often have moved on in their own ways and have found peace and comfort, but not the family of Keith Bennett. They're still searching for young Keith's body, and hopefully one day they'll be able to find him. I think that we got some very interesting answers throughout this episode, and you can make of all of that what you will. But it's been a pleasure having you here watching this documentary with me. I cannot thank each and every one of you who's watching this video enough for what you've done for us and for the channel. And I'm very glad that we were able to finally tell this story properly and give it the respect and treatment that it deserves. As always, I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, stay spooky.